Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the interwar years, the time between World War One and World War Two, to really understand how Europe came to terms with what happened in World War One, and how it affected them moving forward, and certainly how it caused World War Two. So what you see here, this is your assignment today. All right, call it the assessment page, call it whatever you want, but basic questions with the answer boxes there. You type your answers into. You'll notice there are links that go to each particular slide. So in this case, if I go to question number one, the answer for question number one is on this slide right here, and I can click on the top right arrow and bring myself back to here. So the idea is just so ease of navigation. But I do want to kind of go through this and walk you through the content. So if you do struggle with what the questions are asking, at least then you can kind of put together, okay, I understand the content now listening to this, and I can answer it more accurately. So again, we're talking about the interwar years, the climate and culture of Europe, and more specifically the Weimar Republic, which is going to be the government that replaces Kaiser Wilhelm in Germany. So you're looking at a new government in Germany. One of its first things it had to do was actually surrender in World War One. So I think we've seen this quote by now, right? The Paul Valery quote, where we think of what has disappeared and we are almost destroyed by what has been destroyed. We do not know what will be born and we fear the future. Doubt and disorder are in us and with us, and there is no thinking man, however shrewd or learned he may be, who can hope to dominate this anxiety, to escape from this impression of darkness. So when you see this, you have to keep in mind that while the Europeans on the one hand were excited that World War One was over, that's kind of a relief, they're also shocked and saddened and shaken at what they had done to each other. That's terrifying, that what they had done to each other. So when they talk about what has disappeared, that confidence, that swagger, that belief and optimistic kind of view of the world, that doesn't exist anymore. And that kind of sense of nationalistic militarism, warfare, they destroyed it. Well, they called World War One the war to end all wars because that's what they thought it was, the most destructive war in history. And we'll get all our fighting out. We'll be done with fighting. And then it turns out not so much. But we'll talk about that later. We do not know what will be born. So the old system has been destroyed. These are the old traditions. And when we mean by old traditions, we're talking about the old government systems, where you have a king and a queen or a constitutional monarchy, all right, where you have established systems in terms of how to conduct diplomacy or warfare, the impact of society, like all these old traditional institutions that had governed Europe for centuries have been destroyed. And they're not sure what comes out of this. And because of that, they're not sure what comes out of it. That's terrifying. Think of it. The uncertainty is typically what scares us. Nobody would be that afraid of death if they knew after death came this, if we had verifiable proof that, there's an afterlife, that when you die, you go on to something else. People are going to be significantly less afraid of dying because they know what the result is. They know what's on the other side. Whereas I think the level of uncertainty for many people causes that to be a concern. So when we talk about fearing the future, it's a fear of that unknown. Doubt and disorder are in us and with us, reinforcing that uncertainty aspect, that no matter what you think may be coming, and this is relating to that thinking man, however shrewd or learned he may be, whatever you think, whatever you believe is going to come next, whatever plans or predictions you think you can make, there is no more merit in them than anybody's, because every institution, every traditional power structure in Europe has really, the faith in it has been eroded away. And so that's why Europe is in this sense of anxiety. They have no idea what's coming next. No clue. And they can't be confident in themselves in figuring it out because of the massive mistake they just made. You're going to be a little gun shy is really what it comes down to. So you have this quote-unquote impression of darkness. So World War One, after World War One in Europe, you would think it's kind of a good time, and it really isn't quite that good time. It's terrifying. Now, this book by Margaret Macmillan, Paris, 1919, great book. And it really kind of dives into that aspect. I quote her, and she says, "Away from the battlefields, Europe still looked much the same. The great cities remained, the railway lines were more or less intact, ports still functioned. The loss was human. Millions of combatants died in those 4 years. Children lost fathers, wives, husbands, young women, and the chance of marriage. In Europe, lost those who might have been as scientists, as poets and leaders, the children who might not have been born to them, and the children who might have been born to them. But the tally of deaths does not include those who were left with one leg or arm or eye, or whose lung has been scarred by poison gas, or whose nerves never recovered. So what we're talking about here in this first paragraph is the loss was human. And yes, like in terms of the numbers that were killed, for sure. But think of those millions of people that were killed and what they could have contributed to our society. Some doctors, nurses, scientists, engineers. You might have had some of these great accomplishments, the great discoveries that could have been made had these people not given their lives in World War One. One of the great examples is a British chemist by the name of John Moseley, and brilliant chemist, apparently, world renowned in his young 20s, and was going to pave the way for chemistry and advance the discipline by decades and so forth and so on. And he dies in Europe during World War One. And that's one of those things that we look back on and say, man, if that guy had lived, who knows where we would be today? Because we might have understood chemistry back in 1919 at a level that we're just starting to kind of wrap our heads around now because of, we didn't have the great, fantastic advances that this guy might have been capable of. It's the equivalent of like you losing Albert Einstein before he makes his contributions to physics. That's the thing we're talking about. She goes on, for 4 years, the most advanced nations of the world had poured out their men, their wealth, the fruits of their industry, science, and technology on a war that may have started by accident, but was impossible to stop because the two sides were too evenly balanced. When the war ended on 11 November, everywhere people hoped wearily that whatever happened next would not be as bad as what had come to an end. 4 years of war shook forever the supreme self-confidence that Europe had carried to world dominance. After the Western Front, Europeans could no longer talk of a civilizing mission to the world. And so that's that kind of that social Darwinism, white man's burden kind of mindset, right? The Europeans felt that they were better than everybody, that they could go into Africa or Asia or wherever and take over and kind of show everyone what's what because they are better. And it was tough to disprove it because the Europeans had the technology, they had the sophistication for all these things. So the point is that there seems to be some validity to the claims that they were making at that time. All right. Certainly the point where, some people in the indigenous population be like, all right, they've got a point. You've got a case to be made. I don't want to agree with it, but it's hard to refute your point. Well, now you can, because as advanced as the Europeans might be, their actions during World War One were not the actions of an advanced society. That was not killing millions of people is not the actions of a civilized society. So when now the Europeans go to Africa and they say, listen, white man's burden, I'm going to teach you how to go to school, or in India or East Asia or where have you. The people there now have a lot of ammunition to tell the Europeans, no, we're not going to listen to you because your system, your method leads to World War One, and that's someplace we don't want to go. And oh, by the way, you didn't stop it. The Europeans, devoured themselves, put it this way. So it's brutal, it's awful, and it's going to scar the Europeans. It's going to leave a deep, deep scar, again, on that self-confidence. Now, in Germany, much the same scar exists, only it's a little bit different in the sense that, yes, they lack the self-confidence because all of Europe does at this point, but they've got an added edge. When Kaiser Wilhelm left Germany, all right, he abdicated the throne. A new government called the Weimar Republic, because it was created in the city of Weimar, was named the new national government. And one of the first things it had to do was sign the Treaty of Versailles, which upset all the Germans. And the reason it upset them is because the German army basically said, all right, that's it, we're done fighting. It wasn't a surrender per se, but it was an armistice. They agreed to stop shooting. Now, because they had requested it, the Americans, the British, the French, and the other allies basically treated it as if it was a surrender. But for the German citizen, for, Hans G. Fritzenstein, whatever the average Joe is in Germany, it's hard for him to understand how the Germans lost. The armies, while they were advancing through German lines, they didn't get into Germany per se. In some parts they did, but it's not like they invaded all of Germany. Like in World War II, every German knew World War II was over. They knew they had lost because they saw Russian or American or British or French troops. They saw them. They were there. They witnessed it. They know they lost. World War One, you didn't see that. So the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, in which Germany accepts full blame for the war, has to pay for the war, has these territorial losses. The Germans were prepared to, give up some things, but they weren't prepared for that level of harshness. Especially, again, in their mind, they didn't lose the damn war. So they felt that that was entirely unjust. And so you're going to see some resentment and bitterness there. There's always going to be resentment and bitterness when you lose, but this is compounded by the idea of like, you're treating us a heck of a lot harshly, and we feel like we didn't lose. All right? To be fair, the Germans clearly did lose the war. They asked for an armistice in large part because they realized they could not win. And if you can't win, by definition, it's a loss. The second reason that the Weimar Republic is suffering is because of hyperinflation, which is money rapidly loses its value. A lot of students every year will ask, well, if America owes $27 trillion, why don't we just print off $27 trillion and hand it to people? Well, the problem with that is a couple things, but let's break it down to the most simplistic explanation. Think of the gold standard, okay? Let's say that one American dollar bill equals one piece of gold. Okay, one American dollar bill equals one piece of gold. So let's print off 20 more American dollar bills. So now I have 20 more American dollar bills. I didn't print off 20 more pieces of gold. I didn't magically create 20 more pieces of gold. I still have the same amount of gold. I just printed off more money. Now here's the problem. Before, $1 equaled one piece of gold. Now I just printed off 20 times the amount of money. So now it's $20 equals one piece of gold because I printed off more money, but the value of the money didn't, the confidence, or in this case, the gold behind the money didn't increase as well. As a result, the value of the dollar drops precipitously. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but it's one of those reasons we don't print off an awful lot of money. We don't print off a bunch of extra money because if we do that, it results in an undermining of the value of the currency. One of the things that makes the American dollar valuable is there's only so much of it in circulation. And then finally, you have a bunch of political parties that are constantly seeking to overthrow the Weimar Republic. Germany is not used to a democratic tradition. They're not a democracy. The people are not used to participating in a democracy. And so you have political parties that frequently take to violence because you haven't really established that peaceful aspect of elections, that peaceful transfer of power. They really haven't quite mastered that. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of tumult and political turmoil in Germany, as you're going to see rebellions, attempted revolutions, things like that. Now, the Treaty of Versailles, a couple items here that I'd point out to you. One, all right, German war poster showing what they'll lose in the treaty. So Germany's navy is destroyed, no air force is allowed. They lose 20% of their land, 10% of their population, right, 1/3 of the industrial capacity, 25% of their food. So you're seeing on and on and on and on here. What was the cost of Versailles? And this is the idea that the Treaty of Versailles was brutal to the Germans. All right. Satirical cartoon here, you can kind of see the Germans, the German prisoner, aka Germany, going to the guillotine armed by Georges Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France, with Woodrow Wilson on one side and David Lloyd George on the other. The punishment for Germany was seen as a death sentence. Now, on the one hand, France and Britain really wanted to punish Germany. On the other hand, Germany didn't understand, or Germany didn't quite grasp the level of punishment that was meted out to them. They didn't quite get the justification. Because from the German perspective, they clearly were not to blame for starting the war. The war started because Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip. Sarajevo was in Austria-Hungary. Gavrilo Princip is a Serb. In Serbia, he's armed by Serbia. None of those had anything to do with Germany. So if you want to blame the war on Germany, Germany may have been at fault to a certain degree. But so was Russia, Serbia, Austria-Hungary, Gavrilo Princip itself, maybe even France. So to say that it was just Germany was a little bit rough. Those who sign this treaty will sign the death sentence of many millions of German men, women, and children. Again, the idea here is that the signing away of all this land and industrial output is destroying Germany's future. And so that's really where the issue comes in. That's where the major concern is that if the Germans sign the treaty, which they're required to, they don't have much of a choice, but they sign the treaty, they're just destroying Germany's future. And then whose hand would not wither away in that shackles itself in this way? Again, the idea here is that Germany's future is bleak. And again, part of that thing we talked about before, that anxiety, that depression, that impression of darkness, for the Germans, the Treaty of Versailles, that's going to do it. That's definitely going to cast a pall over the future of your country. Now, adding on to that, you have hyperinflation. Now, if you take a look here, all right, hyperinflation, all right, again, we said it's when you print more money than you have the value for that money. So what ends up happening is the value of the money drops precipitously. In my desk in room 326 at school, I have over 55 billion Zimbabwe dollars because they suffered from hyperinflation about a decade ago. And so you could literally get, trillions and trillions of Zimbabwe dollars for 50 cents. It was kind of fun. And it's legit money. I mean, it's got the seal, it's got the watermark, the whole 9 yards. But what ends up happening is you print off a little extra money, and then the value goes down. So you have to print off more money. And so as you print off more and more and more money, the value of the money has gone down, which means the prices have gone up. Think of that gold example I gave you. If $1 American dollar equals one piece of gold, and you can buy one Snickers bar for $1, that's all good. That's basically the way the system works. But if I print 20 times the amount of money, if I print 20 $1 bills instead of just one, I print 20, you didn't increase the amount that it represents. It still represents one piece of gold. And the Snickers bar, take out the middleman, is still worth one piece of gold. So now that Snickers bar is worth $20. And if you keep printing more money, that's going to go up and up and up and up. And we can see in these pictures here, a loaf of bread costs 4.6 million German marks. We have children playing with stacks of German banknotes, like they're just tied together like blocks. Can you imagine that? And then in 1923, a German woman burning the banknotes for warmth. So people are doing this. If we keep going, the bloody uproar of the war is over. Let's enjoy the carnival of inflation. It's loads of fun and paper printed, paper flimsy stuff. Do they call it money? For 5 billion of it, you can get $1. All right. So the idea here is that the money bottoms out. The value of the money is non-existent. This is actually the worst possible news for the middle class. And it's going to sound kind of weird, but trust me, bear with me on this one, okay? If you're wealthy and you have billions of dollars, if you're the Jeff Bezos of Germany at this time, or the, Bill Gates or whoever, you're super, super, super rich. And so when money drops precipitously, you think that group would get hit the hardest, but they don't. And they don't get hit hardest for two reasons. One, there's a lot of invested wealth. They own cars, boats, God knows how many houses or land. So yeah, while the value of the money drops ridiculously, the house still has value. That yacht still has value. Those cars still have value. So unlike the paper, whose value just keeps vanishing, and keeps going down and down and down, the car always has value. Now, yeah, the car value fluctuates and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, it is worth something, as is your house. And then also, let's not forget, if you're that wealthy, you probably have your money in other, more stable environments. Case in point, if you're super wealthy in the United States, all your money is not in the United States. Some of it's maybe in a Cayman Island account, maybe it's a Swiss bank account. You spread it around in a couple different areas. That way, heaven forbid something crashes the American economy, you have some of your money stashed away in the Swiss banks, which means, yeah, you might have lost $1 billion, Jeff Bezos, but you still got a couple billion over in the Swiss. So the upper class they were affected by it, but not terribly affected by it. The poor, meanwhile, hell, what does it matter to them? They had no money to begin with. So the fact that they had no money, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not great. It's not good for them, but they're not going to hit that hard because they went from having no money to having no money. So it doesn't really much matter. The middle class are the ones who really get absolutely squeezed. And the reason is the middle class had been saving money. By and large, the middle class tend to save money in banks. Now, they don't have enough money. They're going to have a Swiss bank account because that's ridiculous. And they're not going to have enough money to spend lavishly on multiple cars and boats and houses and yachts and so forth and so on. So they've got some money left over and they keep it in the bank. The problem is when money rapidly depreciates in value, you're not upping the amount of money in their bank account. You see what I'm saying? So if I have take this for example. Let's say I'm teaching at Braintree High School for $50,000 a year. That's what contract I signed. I'm working for $50,000. If the American economy tanks and we go through hyperinflation and we're printing off billion-dollar bills as if they're $1 bills, I'm still working for $50,000, which is a fraction of the billions upon billions of dollars that are out there being printed because of hyperinflation. So if I have that $50,000 in my bank account, all right, and hyperinflation hits, that money becomes absolutely worthless. Now, if I'm rich, maybe I bought some stuff with it, so that money's in a car or a house. If I'm poor, I don't have that money to begin with. But middle class, they had that money and poof, it's gone. No matter however much you saved, it's worthless now. Because again, keep in mind, a loaf of bread is 4.6